Hey there, I am author Sarah Loudin Thomas. I write historic fiction set primarily in my home state of West Virginia. West Virginia is known for a lot of things, but recently we got a little attention because West Virginia was the last state to actually have a coronavirus case um, diagnosed. So it was really good that our state was on the bottom of a list for a good reason for once. And it inspired some really funny t-shirts and bumper stickers and things like West Virginia social distancing since 1863, which of course is the year that we became a state when we decided, or my ancestors decided, they didn't really like how Virginia was doing things and became their very own state. There's also some sayings like, you stay in your holler and I'll stay in mine. And I really got to get the t-shirt that says West Virginia COVID-19 National Champions 2020. We got to celebrate what we can in West Virginia. But as all this craziness has been going on, and of course this is a great time to get some good reading in, I started thinking about my characters set in the 19 stories in the 30s and 50s and even the 70s, and I thought, well, how would some of those characters deal with coronavirus and social distancing and having to self-quarantine at home. And so I started looking through my books, and I found some clips that I think will give us some ideas about things we can do as we're stuck at home with the coronavirus. So I'm going to read you a few little clips. The first one is from The Sound of Rain. And in this story, I have my heroine, Larkin Hayward, is from South Carolina, and she really wants to go to West Virginia and help the poor people of Appalachia. But she's not necessarily very well equipped to do that. So what would Larkin do during a coronavirus stay-at-home order? Learn to cook. So here is Larkin learning to cook with the help of Granny Jane in the mountains of West Virginia. Larkin stared at the monster of a stove. It was hot and black, and there were no knobs to tweak. She hadn't the least notion what she was supposed to do. Neither mother nor their sometimes housekeeper Liza let her help with the cooking, and she hadn't paid nearly enough attention when she had the chance. Judd was already out front, hammering away, so he wouldn't be any help right now. She cast a nervous glance Granny's way. "Never used one of them before, have you?" "No, ma'am." "Likely you used one of them fancy gas stoves." Larkin nodded, not wanting to admit she hadn't much used the modern stove in the kitchen back home either. "See that bowl on the table with the cloth over it?" Granny pointed. "Spoon those grains into a pot and set it over on the right corner of the stove. They'll warm slow there." Larkin did as she was told, appreciating the warmth radiating from the already filled stove. She wasn't sure she liked the look of the grease congealed on the top of the greens, but told herself it would be more appetizing once it was warm. "Now open the oven door and stick your hand inside. Count slow until it gets too hot to stand." This procedure made Larkin nervous, but again, she did as she was told. She grasped the handle and screeched as it seared her delicate skin. Granny shook her head. "Don't you know to use a rag? If you had an apron on, that'd be just the ticket. Get that cloth over there and use that." Larkin blinked back tears and stuck her blistered finger in her mouth. She used her left hand to open the door, likely frustrating Granny when she had to try twice before growing bold enough to touch the metal, even with a cloth over her hand. She tucked the rag under her arm and held her uninjured hand inside the cavity. "I counted to 30, and maybe I could have stood it a little longer." She wondered if this was a test to see how tough she was. She didn't feel very tough. "Not hot enough. Grab them dry logs on top of the pile and throw 'em in." Larkin wrapped the cloth around her burnt hand and picked up a stick of firewood. She considered where she was meant to throw it in. Surely not inside the oven compartment. Granny cackled and handed Larkin a sort of metal stick. "Pick up that eye there and toss the wood in on the fire." Larkin fit the bit of metal into a notch in one of the circles set on top of the stove and found she could lift it up. Flames crackled inside. She added wood, jumping when the fire flared up. She clapped the eye back into place, wishing she could quit this nonsense and nurse her hand. It'll take more than that. Add 2 more and we'll get to mixing. Larkin repeated the process, flinching each time she put pressure on her burn. Then she fetched out a bowl, a blackened pan, flour, baking soda, salt, and a crock of lard. Granny sent her out to the spring house for some buttermilk, and finally walked her through the process of making biscuits. Now don't knead that dough over much. Makes your biscuits tough. She pointed out a jelly jar and told Larkin to use it to cut out rounds of dough to tuck into the pan. Stick your hand back in that oven and count some more. Larkin stuck her burnt hand in and yelped, then switched to her left hand. 20, and that's all I can stand. Ought to be right. Stick that pan in there and wait 7 or 8 minutes, then we'll turn it around so it doesn't get too done on one side. Now go on out there to the smokehouse and cut us some fat back. So poor Larkin, learning to cook on a big old black cast iron stove. I actually took some lessons in how to cook on a cast iron stove for that, and it is somewhat challenging. So, Larkin's going to learn to cook. Next we have When Silence Sings, which is my latest story that came out last November. In this one, my hero, Coleman Harp, is in the middle of a feud, but he wants to be a preacher. And he's trying to figure out how to reach the enemy, the people that his family has been feuding with for years. And he's kind of stuck in a situation here where he's ended up in a group of women who are doing their mending and just sitting around gossiping and talking, and he's trying to steer the conversation some other way. Well, one of the ladies plucks a dogwood blossom, and Coleman comes up with an idea. He's going to tell a story. Now, what is better during these difficult times than sitting around telling stories? Look, we can even tell stories by video. So stories are a great thing to engage in while we're all stuck at home with coronavirus. Here's Coleman with his first attempt at storytelling. Can I see that? Coleman asked, seeing a way out of the conversation about Ivy. She nodded and handed him the flower. He looked at it closely, remembering what his grandmother told him when he was a boy. I guess y'all know the legend of the dogwood. All eyes turned to him with expectant looks. He supposed at least some of them knew the legend, but didn't want to get in the way of hearing a good story. He smiled. Dogwood trees used to grow big as oaks, he began. As a matter of fact, they were so big and strong and had such good wood, the Romans used one to make the cross they crucified Jesus on. The ladies were still now, almost reverent in their attention. But after his resurrection, Jesus took pity on the tree and said that never again would it be used for such a purpose. From that day to this, dogwoods don't get much bigger than this one here. He stood and patted the trunk he could easily circle with both hands. And this, he held up the flower, is shaped like a cross with 2 short petals and 2 long, and at the tip of each petal is a nail scar. He showed them the crimped pink-stained petals, while in the center rests a crown of thorns. I guess, if we take the time to look around, reminders of God's gifts and graces are all around us, just waiting for someone to notice them. A gentle breeze wafted through the trees and set the branches of the dogwood to stirring as if in approval. Coleman looked around the group and saw smiles, softening faces that likely saw more than their share of grief as the women struggled to raise families and support their husbands in this hard-scrabble mountain land. Nell dimpled at him. That's the nicest sermon I've heard from a preacher in a long time. Coleman felt a surge of pride and noticed Nell had soft brown eyes to go with her golden hair. He looked through the branches of the tree to the cloud-dotted sky beyond and thought maybe it was the nicest sermon he'd preached ever. Okay, so learning to cook, telling stories. My third suggestion comes from Miracle in a Dry Season, which is my first novel. Came out, it's been quite a few years now. In this one, there's a terrible drought. And my heroine, Perla, is able to cook enough food to feed however many people are hungry. There's a little bit of the miraculous going on there. And Casewell is trying hard not to fall in love with Perla because she has a child and she's not married. But when I got the cover for this book, and isn't it pretty? I just love this cover. But when I saw the cover, I said, but there aren't any peaches in the story. And my editor said, oh well. So I thought about it and I decided, excuse me, decided that there needed to be some peaches in this story. So I added a scene that kind of gives us the cover. And I thought, one of the things that so many people are doing, or so Facebook would have us believe, is coming up with new looks. Cutting their hair, shaving a beard, growing a beard. Apparently during the stay-at-home coronavirus time, we are experimenting with our appearance. So here's Casewell, who's going to find the cover and change his appearance up just a notch. So he's gone to dig out an old spring because his well has gone dry. As he lifted the sloshing bucket, he saw something golden out of the corner of his eye and realized there was a stubby peach tree growing just above the spring. A break in the wood sent sunlight skimming over its surprisingly green leaves, and there, amongst the green, were a half-dozen or so ripe peaches. He laughed aloud. Not only did he have fresh water, but he also had just about the best gift he could offer Perla. He remembered her cobbler and thought how glad she'd be to get fresh fruit. Stripping off his shirt, he fashioned a sort of sling and loaded it with warm peaches. He slipped the makeshift sack over his shoulder and picked up the bucket brimming with cold water. Life-giving water, Casewell thought. Then another idea struck him. He carried everything back to the house and set a pan of water to warming on the back of the stove. He stepped into the bathroom and found the shears his mother used to trim his hair. He grabbed his beard and began snipping. Casewell felt a little self-conscious when he stopped by Robert and Delilah's to give Perla the peaches. She came outside to greet him and stared at his clean-shaven face for a moment, but didn't comment. He showed her the fruit, still wrapped in his shirt, and she gathered them one by one into her apron. They somehow seemed more bountiful there, bigger and brighter, more perfect. I can make cobbler enough for everyone now, she said with a shy smile. Casewell felt like he'd done something brave and wonderful, but he reminded himself it was just peaches. I had a couple other snippets from some of my other books. There's Until the Harvest, where a character adopts a dog. Apparently everyone is adopting a dog during the coronavirus pandemic. And then there's Tapestry of Secrets. And in this one, my heroine is a quilt artist. So, learning new crafts, learning how to quilt. There's so many fun things that we can do while we're stuck at home. And as an author, of course, I'm enjoying lots of time reading and writing and hopefully connecting with readers. So if you would like to connect with me, I hope you'll swing by my website, sarahloudinthomas.com. That's SarahLoudinThomas.com. And I'd love for you to drop me a note. Let me know what you're up to during your stay at home. Maybe you're not staying at home. Maybe you're one of those folks who really need to get out there and keep working. And if you are, we really appreciate you. And either which way, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you're finding to do during the coronavirus. And I hope you have a great day, and God bless.